On the 4th of March, the House of Keys will choose 4 people to become members of the Legislative Council. Prior to that vote, Agenda will be speaking with all the candidates so that you can find out more about the people that hope to become national politicians, voting in Tynwald on policy and finance and playing a significant role in shaping the laws of our land. On this evening's programme, we hear from Kerry Sharpe MLC, who is hoping to retain her LegCo seat. So who is Kerry Sharpe?
Well, I'm from the Isle of Man. I went to school here, went away to university, and I was away about 15 years, living in Japan and China, and then I settled in London and I went into television and I became a TV director, making documentaries about people, from all different walks of life. And I used to write for the broadsheet newspapers and got involved with Radio 4, Radio 3, BBC World Service. I came back to the Isle of Man and I just got into conversation with the then manager of the Children's Centre, who said, "Oh, you write? I've always wanted to have a book written about our 150-year history. Might you be interested?" And I thought this was a great way of getting back into things. And so I embarked on my research. And because I'm a very meticulous person, I kind of started at the beginning in 1868. And I went through everything that was in the Manx Museum in terms of all the day books and the annual reviews of the Douglas Children's Home, as it was at the time. And when I got to the 1970s and 80s, and I interviewed people who'd been in the home at the time, I uncovered quite a lot of historical abuse. And then I wanted to know what I could do with this information and how I could get it out into the public, because I was concerned there was still a person around who perhaps shouldn't still be around, who'd committed various crimes. And that's how I became involved with MHKs and with the Tynwald office. And a Tynwald inquiry was set up into historical abuse. And at that time, there was an election held for LegCo, and some of the MHKs suggested that I stand. And so without ever having been consciously involved with politics, I found myself being elected into the Legislative Council. And I suppose since then, I've always sort of kept the plight of children who are in care and care leavers as my kind of guiding force. So throughout my Tynwald career, I've always sort of kept that as my main point of reference, and so that's what then led me to become Children's Champion for this administration and a lot of the work that I've done there. But I mean, over the last 7 years, there's also been so many other things that I've become involved with. But that's basically how I became involved with Tynwald in the first place. And I think that that's fairly typical for a lot of women who go into politics. And I know that from having now spoken to a number of members of the House of Commons and the House of Lords who are women parliamentarians. You know, they've sort of said they were never career parliamentarians. It was when they became really passionate about a certain subject, whether it be whistleblowing or whatever. And then that's what kind of led them down that path.
So I guess with that kind of journalistic background, you'll have found it quite a useful thing to be able to employ when it comes then to debates in Tynwald, discussion on legislation. The fact that you have been used to inquiring and being inquisitive in terms of programme production and the like.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of transferable skills there, because when you're working in television and you're, say, interviewing people, you know, you're listening to members of the public and you're really listening. and then you're editing and you're listening back to what they've said. And you often have the experience as a TV director where people will say afterwards, I've never told anyone that before. And that's something that I've heard many times with members of the public who've come to talk to me about different issues. Often they'll say, well, I've never told anyone that before. Sometimes they find that just talking about it to someone who is in authority can solve an issue that they've been sort of hanging on to for years and years and years. And actually all they needed was to be listened to. And so that's been a useful skill to be able to bring to the role. Also, I think always questioning, not taking anything at face value. I think another skill that I've brought with me is one of being able to have vision. So I think I have found in the past that sometimes that's been a bit lacking in government. And I'm not blaming people who work in government. It's very difficult because whenever you try to do something, someone will always say, oh, well, you can't do that because you don't have the vires, you don't have this, you don't have the budget, you don't have that. And so it's kind of difficult to have a vision. And I think particularly over the last 4 years has been quite interesting because I haven't been in a department. I came out of a department to concentrate more on the children's champion role and a few other roles. And it's a bit easier in a way to sort of have vision then, because you don't sort of have so many barriers in the way. And I think that's something which is really important to hang on to, because if you know where you're going, if you can picture where you're going, it's easier to work backwards and then overcome the barriers. And
do you think that, well, I don't know, I mean, is it down to obstacles within or possibly it's a mix, isn't it, of obstacles within the department, legislative obstacles, financial obstacles, but also if you're working in a department, you are generally incredibly busy because there's loads and loads of things happening across your area of interest that need your attention, and you're so busy attending to things and trying to deal with people's problems and sort out effectively firefighting issues that you don't have perhaps the headspace to do that deeper thinking, the longer term, the strategic thinking that's sometimes absent from government.
It is hard. I mean, you're right. When you're a member of a department, you really are nose to the grindstone. You're in a lot of meetings. You're reviewing a lot of information all the time. It doesn't mean to say that you can't then keep moving things forward while you're in the department. You can, but I found that since I haven't been in a department, I've been able to kind of look at more at the world of how we look after our children in care and care leavers, young carers, children with complex needs. I have been able to look at it with a bit more perspective, I think, because I've had the opportunity to engage more with corporate parenting groups across the British Isles that demonstrate best practice, and do a lot of talking with them to understand what they're doing, what works for them. Also with I've been concentrating on people with disabilities and how we can work together to improve access to office, to political office. I'm really keen to remove any barriers that we have for people who've got disabilities who might want to get involved with politics, because I think obviously the more diverse you get at Tynwald, the better decisions that you can get made. I mean, we're now about 50-50 men and women, which is brilliant. It's better than it's ever been, really, in terms of diversity of the sexes. But there are still an awful lot of people who aren't represented in Tynwald, and we need to do something about that. So, yeah, I have been able to get a bit more perspective also on Parliament as a whole. So I held a workshop for members about the fact that I thought we needed a Tynwald public engagement and communication strategy, which through a lot of work, the Tynwald office has now produced a strategy. And so the office is going to be a bit more kind of aware of, who are the minority voices on the island and how can we reach out to them? How can we explain to people, how can we actively explain to people how they can get involved with the parliamentary process? So one example of what came out of that work is the Tynwald Youth Select Committee. So now we've got young people who have a committee with a Tynwald clerk. They can invite members of the public in to gather evidence. They can question ministers. They can produce reports, which can then go to Tynwald. And so that's like one group that we just didn't hear their voices before, but now we are hearing their voices, and that's really important. So that's sort of how I've been trying to kind of, I suppose when I was a member of a department, I didn't have the chance to look at those particular areas of interest that I've got so much and actually do something about it. So I've really enjoyed doing that.
And that the silo thinking that has often been, the jibe that's thrown at government of departments operating in silos, that also sort of impacts then, if in terms of departmental members, that they're thinking about their particular area and they view issues in everything. Every issue is either a Department of Education issue, or it's a health issue, or it's an infrastructure issue, as opposed to perhaps looking at it from a much broader perspective. Is that the
well, I've found with things that I'm looking at the moment, so let's say as an example, accommodation for older children who are in care and care leavers, this still hasn't been sorted out, and I've been on about this since I came in 2018. We're getting closer, but historically it's been a case that the Department of Health and Social Care has said, well, we would like to have better accommodation or some accommodation, but we haven't got the budget. The building would have to be provided by DOI. That's a DOI issue. With children with complex needs, which is the main theme of my next Children's Champion report, which will be debated next month. One of the issues there is there's a terrible shortage of respite facilities for children with complex needs. Again, Manx Care say, well, we haven't got the budget at the moment, to provide something. Nevertheless, we do need to provide something. Parents who've spoken to me have said, well, maybe we could use some of the special education units in the primary schools, perhaps. Maybe we could use those during summer holidays when it's really difficult for some of the families, because if you've got a child with complex needs and say the family can't afford a specialised van to put, a complicated large wheelchair into, some of these families are literally stranded at home, for a whole 6 weeks, with all the other siblings as well. The families can't get out, and they all get on top of each other, and there's a lot of stress involved for everyone. And, parents have said, well, maybe some of these specialist units could be kept open. Of course, Department of Education say, well, our remit is only to provide education during term time. We don't provide respite. And so it to me, it's like, well, yeah, but maybe education and health could work together to solve this problem. And a bit of money could come from here and a bit of money could come from there. And also I've begun to think a lot more about, well, government can't do everything. Government can't pay for everything. How can we set up systems where government puts in a bit of money, the third sector puts in a bit of money, the private sector puts in a bit of money? There's a lot of problems that I want to solve for children with complex needs that could be solved by bringing all three of those bodies together, public, private and charities.
This is radical thinking, of course.
But it would solve problems. And maybe, there's a way that we can look at sort of individual problems. So massive problem at the moment is not enough public space changing toilets for people who need a hoist. So this means actually that not just children but adults who have a need to use a hoist when they go to the toilet can't leave the house, because you can't go out, you can't go anywhere, you can't go to work, you can't have a job if you need a hoist to go to the toilet. So, this is a really obvious problem that needs to be solved. And so we need public space changing facilities in the north, the south, the east and the west of the island. Now, government will say, well, it's a local authority problem. Local authorities will say, well, we haven't got the money. So, surely there has to be a way that we can all get together and we can say it's actually the responsibility of everybody. But what kind of a body can we create where we can take bits of money from lots of different organisations and put it together to solve one problem? Because maybe if we looked at things from individual problems and how do we solve them, it might become a bit easier than having to think, but first we need a huge strategy on how can we solve every single problem under the sun for this particular cohort of people. Maybe we took one problem at a time on a bit more of a kind of a human scale, and actually just got the right people around the table and had conversations about them, we might come up with some more solutions.
To many people listening to this programme, they'll be saying, well, surely this is blindingly obvious stuff and should be happening. But for those of us who sadly have had significant experience working in government and in departments, what tends to happen in these multidisciplinary approaches to problems is everyone sits there effectively defending their department's position, and generally it is defending because there isn't as much money about as perhaps there was 20 years ago, and everyone in the departments that are supposed to be delivering these solutions is in a position of financial constraint, although again the public may not believe that. How do you overcome that? How do you overcome this the position where effectively people are having to defend their particular bit of territory, or sometimes possibly even their professional territory that they're trying to defend?
I know it is difficult for government, and I can see how the system we've got has evolved. And also the thing for government is if you've got to spend even one penny of taxpayers' money, you've got to be able to justify why you're spending that. And in order to justify it, you need data. And of course, government's very short of data, which kind of holds things up a bit when it comes to decision making. But you've got to be able to justify it. And so I can totally see why government would say, going back to the problem of, public changing space toilets. Right, okay, well, first of all, we need to understand the problem. We need data on how many people, where they live, this sort of thing. I can understand why they have to go. And then they'll say, this is a problem for this cohort of people, but obviously when you're dealing with the whole of health and social care, there are so many people with needs and there's only so much money. So you have to be able to justify your priorities and how you're using taxpayers' money. So I can totally understand that. But, you asked, how do we get around all this, And I do think that we do need to be having more conversations, real conversations. and not just within departments, because if you're inside a system, you can only think within that system. There needs to be more conversations between the people who are at a senior level within departments and charities and the private sector, I think, in order to think about things in a different way. Because in government, it's very much sort of you have a meeting and there's a big boardroom table and everyone sat round, and that's not how humans communicate with each other, and it's not how humans naturally come up with solutions. Again, if you get different people around the table, charities, private sector, then you're going to get a lot more alternative solutions to any problem. And I mean, I do think that, especially with the private sector, there is money out there. There are lots of large companies on this island who want to put back in to the community, you know. They do have money to spend. And wouldn't it be great if it could be redirected towards what we actually need? Of course, the argument there is always going to be, well, you know, should the private sector be paying for things that people perceive government should pay for? But, you know, let's face it, we've come out of a major global pandemic, an economic crisis. You know, we have to think about things in a different way.
So we're almost at the end of the programme now. Well, first of all, what's your proudest achievement so far as a member of LegCo?
Proudest achievement? Gosh. Well, I've been involved with lots of things. I mean, and also, I think when you're a member of Tynwald, you don't just sort of achieve things on your own so much. You know, you achieve things along with other colleagues and with colleagues in government as well. I mean, I suppose some of the highlights for me have been the Limitations Childhood Abuse Act, which I took through LegCo, which means that adult survivors of abuse can now bring cases to the civil court, no matter how long ago abuse took place, which has been a really positive achievement. Also, working on the Domestic Abuse Act, I noticed the other day that the Women's Refuge is now closing because there's no need for it. And that's amazing, because you think, wow, so people who have experienced abuse are now able to stay in their own homes with their children. They don't have to leave anymore. And that's such a positive change to see. And you think, wow, you know, we worked on that. That's really great.
And that is something that's very occasionally that does happen when you're in Tynwald, that there is something that you've managed to achieve or you've been part of that actually is making that really big difference.
Yes.
And I suppose then in the last couple of minutes that we've got, why should a member of the House of Keys decide to put their tick alongside Kerry Sharpe as opposed to any of the other candidates? What is it that you bring to the table?
Well, I think I bring 7 years' experience, so that's been incredibly valuable. So I've got a solid understanding of the legislative process, of parliamentary scrutiny, legislative scrutiny, how government works, how they work together, and also, you know, where we are as an island in comparison to other parliaments across the world. You know, what we do in relation to other parliaments across the world as well. So that's been a really useful perspective. I think I've got the right kind of personality. You know, I'm a calm person. I don't take things personally. I'm meticulous, hardworking. Why else should they want me back? I think that I've got that corporate memory of what's gone before with the previous administration, the current administration. I want to help this administration deliver its 2026 goals. But there's still an awful lot more that I want to do. There's an awful lot more that I want to see happen. I want to make sure that we do care leavers legislation, make it as good as possible, as fit for purpose. And looking forward to the next administration, I think that I can bring all of that knowledge and skills and experience through to make sure that the foundations that we're putting in place now with this administration carry on into the next.
That was Kerry Sharpe MLC, who was putting her name forward for a further 5-year term in the Legislative Council. So what do you think? Is Kerry Sharpe a good candidate? Well, over the next few months we'll hear from all the candidates so you can make your own mind up. If you are standing, please get in touch so we can arrange an interview. As the rules for LegCo elections have changed recently, we don't get to find out yet who has applied for a seat in LegCo, despite, rumour has it, there being more than 20 applicants. If all the applicants get formally nominated, then we will have just a few weeks to give you a chance to hear from them all. So, if you are hoping to be nominated, please get in touch so we can get your interview aired. Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now, though, I'm Phil Gorn. Goramayo, thanks for listening.